Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. A white, wealthy West Virginia couple is accused of treating their 5 black adopted children like slaves.
It's no secret how deep racism goes in this country, yet somehow we're still stunned by cases like the one we're bringing you tonight. We begin with a case out of West Virginia. Gene Whitefeather and Donald Lance, a white couple, are accused of treating their 5 adopted children like slaves. We know for sure 3 are black, according to the indictment. Prosecutors say the children were also targeted and adopted because of their race. The pair was arrested last fall. This was after a wellness check turned into a reveal about the living conditions of the children. 2 of the children, 14 and 16 years old, were found living in a barn outside. Neighbors tipped law enforcement off. Deputies discovered there were limited resources in that barn. The teens only had a small porta potty, no running water, or a mattress. According to neighbors, the children were not allowed inside of the home, the main house, and had to do farm labor outside instead. Whitefeather denies the allegations and says the barn was simply a teenage clubhouse. Both Whitefeather and Lance are now behind bars as they wait for a trial to begin September 9th. Joining us to talk about it here on The Factor Uncensored, we have with us parent David Settles, Todd Smith, the CEO of Regal Media, and trauma therapist Chow Nguyen. Glad to have you all on The Factor Uncensored. So, David, first of all, as a parent hearing this story, and we have learned that the judge admonished them in court in another hearing, saying, I have never in my life seen anything like this. Your bond was $200,000. Come back. It is now $500,000 each.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the judge did the right thing by increasing the bond. But as a parent, absolutely, it's downright deplorable, right? It's not even just disgusting, but it's purely evil at this point, right? And but to go back to the point about them raising the bond, you know, people have been talking about the foster care system and adoption regulations and things like that. Chances are there wasn't an adoption agency or any foster care system involved in this case, because they raised the bond with allegations of like human trafficking. So we don't even know how these kids ended up in their care in the first place.
We do know they were adopted, or they received their custody in Washington State and then moved to West Virginia. Were people wise? Were people getting concerned about what they saw in Washington, and that's why they moved to West Virginia? That's a question we still have to explore.
Two things come to mind. The child welfare system, which is an institution that really needs some serious reform. There was talk about defunding the CPS and foster care system. It's not there to protect the children in cases like this. That's a whole other issue. The institutions that are meant to support children can sometimes hurt them. And the other thing I think about is the trauma that's instilled on these kids for a lifetime. We talk about something called adverse childhood experiences, neglect, abuse, poverty, unhealthy sanitary conditions, poor parenting. Those are things that can affect those children for a lifetime, that can create PTSD, anxiety, depression, poor relationships, poor jobs, crime. Those are very serious outcomes for those children.
And Todd, we've heard that the 16-year-old boy in this case reeked and had sores on his feet. It was so bad the neighbors could smell it.
It just, if you look at the images, it looked like an old school plantation. The shed, the barn looked like a slave shack. It's just, like David said, it's just evil. And to think in 2024, you still have people who see black people and children at that as property, just to use for their own purposes and stuff like that. The only way to describe it is evil. This is for the first time in my being on this show, I'm just flabbergasted. I have really nothing to say about how this is, but this is why we should take racism seriously. This is why when people talk about certain things, we should listen to them, because it's so easy to fall back into the trap of yesteryear when things happen that were this atrocious. You know what I mean? It's people would do evil things to people, to innocent people. So we have to really be careful about, you know, the race relations in this country and stuff like that, and so we won't fall back into that trap again.
And of course, we heard from the judge and prosecutors that these kids were targeted because of their race. This is why those parents went after them.
So that's why we need to take a serious look at the child welfare system. We don't know what happened to these kids, but did you know that only 15% of all cases in which children are taken away from their parents involve physical violence? A lot of them involve neglect. We're talking about maybe there's not enough food at the table, maybe they weren't clothed properly, maybe mom or dad had an addiction problem, things that stem from trauma. If we can address keeping families together and address things like poverty and prosperity and economic prosperity, maybe we can keep families together so we don't see these situations. Something has to seriously be done about that institution.
And we're hearing that they also sold a $700,000 ranch and a $200,000 house, I think,
the house
as well.
That they were in.
And many prosecutors are questioning how they were able to get that money, whether those kids played a role in forced labor to pay for those things.
I mean, we don't know, but it would seem so. Like they had no source of income that the judge knew about. So how are you making this type of money? They're enslaving people. You know, they're trafficking kids. You know, they think it's 1824, not 2024. And like Charles said, we have to start at the root and fix some of the problems that people are having that lead to this situation, because there's no child that should be. These kids are going to be traumatized for life. And the excuses that they use, oh, it was a clubhouse. When I was a teenager, I didn't want nothing to do with a clubhouse. I wanted to hang out with my friends and do normal things. That's elementary stuff. And the fact that the cops had to pry the door open. If that's a clubhouse, why can't they come and go? I have friends that have clubhouses for their children. They can come and go as they please. So all of that is nonsense. They are enslaving people. And I've mentioned this before on this show. People think slavery ended in 1865 through convict leasing and other things. Black people have always had to deal with the possibility of being enslaved again. And now in 2024, we have kids having to go through things that my ancestors went through, and it's horrifying.
Last 30 seconds.
14% of this country is a black population, yet 25% of all kids in the child welfare system are black. There's a serious racism problem in the foster care and the child welfare system.
All right, we want to thank you all for joining us here on The Factor Uncensored. We could go on and on tonight about this, but we're out of time. Still ahead.
Now, in the disturbing court records of this alleged incident, wealthy white couple Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather are accused of adopting 6 black children ages 6 to 16 years old from a shelter for the homeless and vulnerable youths, and looking to make them into slave labor that would work on their property. And according to court records as related to the federal indictment against Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather, it's alleged that they basically took these 6 children, and instead of providing them with a home where they had love, what they did was put them on their property inside of a barn. And as they put the children on this property inside of a barn, they were forced to live in squalid conditions where they had no bed, they had no running water, no electricity or lights. They were just put into this barn with a porta potty, and this was the place that they were made to stay in when they were not being forced to do slave labor on the property of Whitefeather and Lance on their farm. Now, neighbors began to see the disturbing behavior going on at the property of Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather, and they began to contact law enforcement, and deputies got a warrant and basically raided the home, where they found 2 of the children inside of one of these barns. And after finding these children inside of these barns, the police then arrested Jean Whitefeather and Donald Lance, and eventually they were winding up charged with federal charges of human trafficking, forced labor, and child neglect. Now, the West Virginia police see this as an isolated incident, but when I take a very critical examination of these disturbing behaviors, it definitely fits the pattern and profile for beta males and feminist indoctrinated women that I talk about in my books, The Man Crisis and The Woman Crisis, and definitely shows me that Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather were basically looking to exploit these children as they were looking to participate in their paternalistic, twisted fantasies of replicating and recreating a modern day slave plantation on their property. Now, Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather basically were living a whole idea of being in a place I call the secret world in the Man Crisis. And in that secret world, they wanted to create a rose colored reality where they could replicate their racist ideas of being able to subjugate these black children and raise them to have a whole codependent mindset where they would look to depend on them the same way that black slaves had believed that they needed to depend on the slave master. And that's where this whole situation becomes extremely disturbing, because what's happening here is that we have two individuals who didn't want to give these children love and care. No, they didn't see these children as people who needed love and care, coming from an extremely vulnerable situation, being homeless and vulnerable youths that came from shelters and were looking for a place where they could be nurtured and cared for. No, what this opportunist wanted to do was find people who he could see as objects so that he could be able to exert his power and dominance over them. That's what was happening here with Donald Lance and Jean Whitefeather. This paternalistic individual basically wanted to be able to exert his power over people like property, and what he wanted to do was have power over people like property and instill this whole mindset in these children at an early age that they could have no power out of him. And this is the foundation of white supremacy. And this white supremacist, basically what he wanted to do was go out here and break these children down, take away their power and agency, and make it where these children were dependent on them. And this was deliberately done with malice of forethought, because he willfully and intentionally went out here seeking to find black children to participate in this whole disturbing whole plan. He wasn't looking to go out here and find any non-black children such as Mexicans or Indians. No, in his mind, those were people, but black people were property, and this was something that was instilled possibly in this racist ever since he was young. And now that he had the economic resources, he thought he could go out here and participate in being able to participate in his fantasy of being able to see a black person broken down and be under the control of a slave master, the same way that many foundational black American descendants had to live in this kind of oppression during the days of the antebellum South. And in those days of the antebellum South, what the slave master wanted to do was get power over people, because he didn't see black people as people. No, he saw black people as property, as part of his chattel slavery. And as he saw black people as being property as his chattel slavery, he saw them as objects that basically were utilized as tools to do his labor. And what's really disturbing is that this man and this woman went out here and wanted to use children as labor and use them as tools to work on their farm, when they could easily have gone out here and found labor and found people who would work as labor, like people who entered the country illegally, or skilled laborers to go work on their farm and pay them a wage. But this was not about looking to run a business. No, this was all about looking to maintain a sense of power. This is what this whole situation is all about, as related to this white man and this white woman. They wanted to be able to show the power that a white man and a white woman had in the system of white supremacy during the days of slavery. And that's what was done, I believe, to this children. And that's what basically makes these two individuals into monsters in my eyes. What makes them monsters in my eyes is that in this age where we have all of this technology to be able to farm property with just machines and basically a couple of laborers, these individuals look to go out here and take these children, who again were just little kids and just again ranging from 6 to 16, just children, and put them in a place where they were looking to manipulate the adoption system to be able to adopt these black kids, not to see them as children, but to see them as slaves on an auction block, and basically looking for the strongest and the most fertile black children to be those slaves on that plantation for them to exploit, and looking for those children that they were looking to exploit and work them on their farms, and even worse, basically look to exploit them possibly in other deviant ways, because when it came to the slave master, not only was he a paternalistic and condescending individual, he was a sexual deviant who went out here and exploited children and treated them like because he thought they were property, but sexually abused the children. That is what the slave master did. Now, I don't know what went on with these children, but just working them, putting them in those squalid conditions, dehumanizing those children, that in and of itself just showed how reprehensible these individuals were as related to their behavior, and showed how little regard they had for these children. Because when it comes to children, again, when you think of adopting children, it's all about giving that child love and giving that child care. But these people didn't care about those children. No, all they saw was objects that they could use to work their farm. And it's just disturbing to think that these two individuals saw these children as somebody they could just abuse, and like that. I mean, that's what really is so sick and twisted about this whole situation with these children. I mean, these children have been further traumatized at coming out of homelessness, coming out of poverty, and being made to live in squalid conditions, not really being given anything. And when it comes to these sick and depraved individuals, I believe the federal government really needs to send a message to the world regarding these individuals for just, again, abusing these children. They need to send a message to that when it comes to abusing children like this, that federal government will prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law, and after punishing them to the fullest extent of the law, they need to put both of these individuals inside of the penitentiary, and they need to be put in that penitentiary for the rest of their lives, where they need to suffer hell that they put these children through. Because once Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles find out about what these monsters did to those black children, they are going to be upset about what they did to those children, and they're not going to think about race as they look to show this slave master and his wife how things work in the penitentiary. Because when they're in that penitentiary, they are not going to be people. No, they're going to have lost all their rights, and they will reap what they sow when they are seen as property by the state and federal system, and they're working on that in that penitentiary for 10 cents a day, 10 cents an hour at petty jobs. And as they're in there, they're going to suffer at the hands of Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles, and Betty, Bertha, Big Lou, and all the women inside the female penitentiary, as they are basically forced to sacrifice their dignity for Little Debbie snack cakes, ramen noodles, packets of Crystal Light lemonade, packets of Crystal Light tea, off-brand lemonade, off-brand lemon lime drink, off-brand fruit punch, off-brand grape drink, off-brand apple juice, off-brand Oreo cookies, off-brand duplex cookies, off-brand vanilla cookies, off-brand strawberry cookies, off-brand vanilla wafers, off-brand vanilla snaps, off-brand chocolate cookies, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pies, Hunt snack pack pudding, Kit Kat candy bars, Fritos chips, Prison chips, Taster's Choice coffee, packets of soy sauce, packets of sriracha sauce, tuna, and other assorted things. As this white man who was living the life of a millionaire, he will weep and wail in tears as he's forced to sacrifice his dignity, as related to having to sacrifice his front side and his back side for items of commissary that were sold in a grocery store for small change. And this millionaire will just again weep and howl as he's spit roasted by Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, and Melvin. And after they finish going out here spit roasting him, they will go out here and have Mr. Sprinkles come in, spray him with the special sauce on the front side and the back side, call all the people in cell block D to go look at Mr. Sprinkles' handiwork as they show his backside looking like the inside of a Louisiana crunch cake, and he will deserve everything that he did to those children as related to taking away their innocence, not giving them the love and care that a man who loves children would do. He would deserve everything he would get inside of that federal penitentiary for the rest of his life, and he would belongs in the general population, not the supermax, where supermax would basically have him in the 20 underground for 23 hours a day. No, put this man in the general population where he can run into people who will show him what slavery really is like in these modern times. And because once you get in the penitentiary, again, it's a whole different world, and this guy needs to experience that world, him and his wife, because these two modern-day slave masters look to, again, destroy the lives of these children, and that's what makes them, again, just monsters all around. If these charges are true, makes them monsters because you just basically destroyed the life of children in an effort to go out here and be able to have your fantasy where you look to have the power of a slave master, and again had the power to go out here and show these children love, but you wanted to treat them like 3/5 of a person, and that's what makes these two individuals just, again, sick beyond belief. You had the money and the power to basically help these children grow and actualize their potential, but instead of looking to help those children grow and actualize their potential, basically treated these children like a piece of property. And that's just something that is troubling because, again, we just celebrated Juneteenth, that celebrated the freedom of foundational Black Americans, and instead of these children being able to enjoy the freedom that they have in this country, we have racists and white supremacists like this looking to take them back to the days of slavery, looking to take away a child's power because these people really, again, feel inferior inside of themselves. And because they feel inferior inside of themselves, what they want to do is break down another person, take away their power, take away their agency, take away their ability to develop the ability to have their own power, and look to put them in an oppressive position where they want to put them at the bottom of the world because that's how they feel about themselves. And that's what makes these individuals, again, just so sick and twisted, because, again, you don't want to see a black person as a human being. And again, it's really sad that almost 150 years since Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, giving black people their freedom in this country, you have racists out here like this looking to take away our power because they want to go back to a time as related to their old Southern tradition, go back to a time of their old Southern tradition where It's not about seeing black people, again, being cared for and taken care of. It's all about them having this power to abuse someone and feel that sense of superiority because they have a sense of inferiority about themselves, and have that sense of superiority because they have this sense of inferiority about themselves because they fear being in the presence of black people having power, and this is their way to find gratification by breaking black children down. And again, that just makes these individuals monsters because, again, in this 21st century, you would think we would be beyond this with a black president in the White House. But the whole thing is, after the election of Barack Obama, it showed the world a lot of people have a problem with the whole idea of black people taking power. I saw this when I did the John Haynes Godbreaker cover, and these spellbound individuals basically want to maintain the system of white supremacy, and a lot of them long for the days they could go back to the days of slavery in the antebellum South. So what they want to do is, again, find ways to participate in their whole deviant ideas in the secret world, because this is something that happened in the secret world. And as the secret came out, we found out how some of these racists are so depraved that they really want to go back to those days of slavery and will do anything to go back to those days, including abuse and exploit children. And that should trouble everyone, because this whole situation just shows how depraved an individual can be and the lengths they will go to go out here and take the power away from black people. Now, if you want to learn more about the mindset that motivates an individual to participate in this type of just deviancy and just pure evil, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.